Welcome to our first event of this year of the Latino Design Histories series. The purpose of the series is to expose the diverse stories of design in Latin America. This event is the result of a cooperation between SODA and AIGA Baltimore. This year we have the support of the grant by the Robert W. Reich Foundation and also the Design History Society support. We will hear today María Cossío and Edgar Reyes. Hello, Edgar. Hello, Maria. Welcome. So we are very happy. We're very glad of having Edgar and Maria with us, and also to have all of you tonight, actually. My name is Raquel Castedo. I'm a member of the IAGI Baltimore board and the SODA, which stands for Society of Design Arts. SODA was founded over 15 years ago in Baltimore by an all-volunteer group of teachers, students, and design professionals. All of them were passionate about the multiple histories of design arts, including graphic design, illustration, architecture, book arts, photography, and many more. SODA has provided more than 100 seminars that have explored a diverse range of subjects. If you want to know about our past programs, please check out our website, sodabaltimore.com, and also sign up on our mailing list to find out about any future events. In our website, you will see that since 2019, we have been co-hosting events with IAGA Baltimore and building together a community that is interested in design history and its positive impact on design practice and contemporary life. Our partnership with IAGA is key. We are committed to expand design globally and locally and to work together to inspire and learn together in each of our professional life stages. Our 75 headquarters are managed by volunteers that assist more than 200, many people all throughout the country. We invite you to get to know more about ourselves at iaga.org. We want to thank all leaders of our headquarters, national representatives, especially the members of our local executive board, particularly our president, Frances. Hi, Frances, thank you very much. She is here with us today.
Hola, bienvenidos.
Hello. Thank you. To find out more about our headquarters and to get to know about our future events, please visit our website. I also have to thank very especially our interpreters, Julieta Mendez, Laura La Fuente, Meg Batalla, and Patricia. This event wouldn't be possible without the help of our cooperators. And also thank you very much to the members of AIGA who are backstage, Vio Jensen, Victor Davila, and Alec Corker. Thank you very much once again for being with us tonight. Thank you for what we have attendees from from Pasadena. I'm checking the chat box to see where you're coming from. We have people from all over the world, and we want to just start with today's session. To start with this conversation, this event will last 1 hour and 30 minutes. After the initial presentation by our Mexican speaker, Dr. María González de Cossío, we will have a question and answer session with our guest from Baltimore, Edgar Reyes. And if you have any questions, please send them via chat. We will translate them if necessary. So I would like to start by introducing María González de Cossío. She is a researcher of information design from Mexico. She holds a PhD from the University of Reading, the UK. She has published in different international journals such as Visible Language, Tipográfica, Digital Creativity, Print and Information Design Journal. She is the author of Information Design and Everyday Life book published by the Designia Publishing House, and her research interests are focused on information design for social impact. Thank you very much, Maria. Also, we have with us Edgar Reyes, who is a multimedia artist based in Baltimore. He earned his MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and has taught at nonprofit organizations, schools, and museums. Many of his projects are autobiographical and a reflection of his personal journey as an undocumented youth in the United States. Reyes is driven by the desire of raising awareness and questioning the displacement of his community. He explores how the blending of indigenous and European traditions is an ongoing process of conquest and resistance. His art practice highlights the beauty of being Mexican-American, yet questions his national and cultural traditions. He challenges social norms to express what it means for him to be labeled Latino. His art making is centered around building compassion and understanding regarding the complex history of forced and voluntary resettlement throughout the Americas. Thank you, Edgar. I give the floor now to Maria so that she may begin with her presentation today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you, Francis, and thank you, Edgar, for being here today. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be with you. I will start by sharing my screen, my presentation on Mexican railways and information design. Thank you beforehand to the interpreters, the translators, and I hope that with the slides on English, it will be much easier for you to translate. The contents of this session today is made up, but first of a brief description of what information design means, which has been my passion. I worked on graphic design for so long, and finding information design was key. I started working on that area immediately. Then we will speak about railways in the 19th century. So let's start. What is information design? Here we have two definitions. The first one was given by the IIID, this the National Institute of Information Design, which is an association that was founded in 1984-85 in Austria by Peter Simlinger. And they say that information design seeks to have people understand better one another. On the other hand, the definition at the bottom part of the screen is transforming data into information so that we can all understand it and so that we can all understand our context. So let's see this definition. The IIID gathered a series of professors and professionals and scholars to draft this definition of information design. So we will address each of these words separately to understand this. I skip the word high quality because first we need to define what information means. Information is actually how we are gathering data, manipulating them, organizing them, but especially to help people to develop knowledge, to be able to make decisions, etc. So information is the result of transforming data. And here we have one of the examples. You must have seen it before, some of you. This was included in the New York Times. And here they explained to us, and you see the date here, they very early in the COVID area, they explained to us what was the chain of transmission of contagion. Here we see the data processing, data organized so that we could understand what that data meant. When we speak about high quality information, we notice a series of features that this information must comply with. We have the list: accessible, adequate, attractive, complete, understandable, etc. What does this mean? That this has to have a value for people. It has to be timely so that we can have that information when we need it. And if we go back to the New York Times example, we see that this graph complies with all these characteristics. It's concise. It very briefly tells us how one person can transmit the disease to many other people and so on. So we have an example of a design object that was published by the Mexican government. And this object was to see if we were able to go back to normality, the new normality, as they call it, on June the 1st, 2 years ago. And what I say here what I say to my students here is, let's see if this is high quality information. In fact, one of the students said, showed me this, all the elements that do not comply with this characteristic of high quality information. It was not correct, it was not complete, understandable, adequate, timely. So this is a good exercise so that you yourself, when you're developing a project, you can see if you're actually transmitting high quality information.
Going back, therefore, to our concept of what information is actually aiming at, it aims at empowering people. Therefore, it is important to see how it is important for people to be able to develop that power, whether it is referring to cultural, religious, or other aspects. There is a slogan called El 9 nadie se mueve. On the 9th of March, in this case, nobody moves. So there was this wish of trying to defend rights and knowing the rights first. That's the empowerment that we women needed to get in order to be able to go out to the streets. Or for example, this group of women who want to learn to write. Why? Because they want to empower themselves. Or also another example, in Mexico, in the traffic, usually traffic fines are very usual. So if we know the regulations, the traffic regulations, we empower ourselves in order to defend ourselves or to have enough arguments if what they are telling us is not right. So when I talk about people, what I mean are specific users. We are talking about, well, what Mollerup says, which is a Norwegian designer. He talks about the prepared mind, or Bonsiep, that talks about a competent user. What do they mean by that? We need to study our users so as to know what are the minds, which are the minds we are going to tackle, to be focused on. Who are the competent users that we are going to establish our bridge with. You can see here a variety of people. I'm going to mention this again later on. We were analyzing drugs here, medication, and you can see mothers, nurses, doctors, all of them are competent users of this drug, of this medicine, because they are in touch with them, either because they are pediatricians or because they are mothers who are using it. So why? To attain goals. Goals as what? As learning how to read a book, how to know the right metro station where we need to get off. So there are different goals and different designs for that. Bob Horn mentions three goals, three objectives. First, to develop documents that will be easy to understand, easy to translate, and also easy to act upon them. This is the drug I was telling you before. We did the information design for the prescription of this medicine so that all mothers could actually administer properly. We conducted some tests with the users so as to check whether they understood what the prescription said. Therefore, what we are doing is helping them to make decisions about how much of that medicine to give to each one of their sons and daughters. Or for example, this one, which is like a tax record. This was at the time when the Spaniards had just arrived and they needed to register what each group or community had to pay as taxes. So you could see here that there were costumes, blankets, feathers. That is also information design because it is helping us, in this case, to keep a record of which are the taxes that they need to pay. Or this other example from one of my students, Juan José Meléndez. He worked on making graphic instructions for kids with autism. So now he's testing the instructions here in the picture. Second, to design interactions with equipments that are easy, natural. So there's no better example than the beautiful instructions of the Lego games or toys. It's amazing to see the fingers, the hands of young children creating everything and with no words. It's just by means of images. And there's also, for adults, these kind of Legos, but different. In this case, this is a bed, a double bed from IKEA. And the manual, the instructions to make this bed, they do not include a single word, but they are perfectly well understandable if we follow the instructions. So as you see, we are helping build this kind of interaction, communication. And third, it helps people to organize ourselves in the virtual space. So an example of the metro in Mexico, made by Lance Wyman. And as we know that that image belongs to Chapultepec, then we know that we can act upon it based on the information that we are receiving. Or websites where we can actually browse from one place to the other, getting the information that we were looking for. There are two emblematic examples before moving on to our specific topic for today, which is the railways, the railway system. I would like to show you these two examples first, because I think that they give a perfect example of what an information design is. First of all, this map, I don't know if maybe some of you have already seen it. It's a map designed by Joseph Minard that shows the Napoleon's invasion to Russia in 1812, 1813. If you have a look here, this strap or golden or yellow strap, this strap that you can see here and that runs alongside, like towards the right, those are the French troops that left France and that arrived in Moscow. So we are talking about this strap becoming smaller, thinner. That implies the amount of soldiers, the troops that are becoming smaller and smaller because of a disease or because they are dying. And look how that, when reaching Moscow, becomes another strap, but in black, that diminishes or comes back. So we are talking about 400,000 soldiers leaving France in early June and moving throughout all this land. They arrive in Moscow in flames with nowhere to protect themselves from the cold, no food. So the return of them shows how the number of soldiers become increasingly smaller. And at the bottom, you can see the line. I actually don't know if you can see it. Well, I'm showing with the cursor, I'm showing you here. This is the temperature. The amount of French soldiers who died, not because of the battles, but mainly because of the temperature, is quite high. Tufti, he says this is one of the best figurative charts that ever existed, and I agree with him. The second example, this is the map of the London Tube, the London Metro. This map, which is actually a diagram or a chart, so this picture was taken, well, by Ken Graland, who wrote a book in 1994. I mean, he was able to interview Harry Beck, and he was the one who actually made this tube map. He was an electronic engineer, and he started connecting the stations as if they were electric circuits. That was his inspiration. And let me tell you that this London tube map is the one, like the mother map, where all the rest of the tube maps belong or stem from. So let's see what happens with the information design now and the Mexican railways. First of all, I would like to tell you that this work that I'm presenting to you today emerged because I needed to find historical examples for a book that I was making. So a background of design information in Mexico. A discipline needs to be based on a whole body of knowledge. And part of that is our history, where we are coming from, so as to know where we are heading for. So in order to make this work for this book, I decided to divide it into different or relevant moments in the history of Mexico. So they could be chronological or sequential. In this case, the railway system was chronological. But then I thought that making a history of information design in Mexico is very ambitious. So I was not going to achieve all of that. So I chose certain times in the history of Mexico so as to see which were the important information design objects that were produced there, and then transform that data into information, what we were saying before. So now let's focus, yes, specifically on our topic. This is a timeline for you to see which was the context of Mexico, why Mexico was lagging behind so much in the construction of their railways. At the top, you can see the invasions and the wars, and at the bottom, the presidents. Mexico independence was seen from 1810 to 1821. So at the bottom, you will be able to see all these colors. This color code, they belong to the different presidents we had. Guadalupe Victoria. I'm not going to say all the names, as a matter of fact, because I don't know them by heart. But anyway, there are many that repeated themselves. So, for example, this yellow part is from Juarez, President Juarez. And above, on the upper side, you can see the turbulence or the turmoil at that time. On the one hand, the separation of Texas, then Texas coming back together, then going to Mexico. In 1824, our first emperor, Iturbide was ousted. So over here on the upper side, you will see the international scope or context. So over here, as I was saying before, Texas. Mexico is the dark part of the map, but all the part of California, Nevada, Utah, even Wyoming used to belong to Mexico back then. So then we have the French invasion, the arrival of Maximilian. And something interesting about him is that he brought a lot of modern ideas. And one of the things he did was to establish a school to develop maps. So there is a great contribution from him there. As you can see, the first 60 years of the 19th century experienced a lot of turmoil. The amount of presidents, the amount of discussions or debate between liberals, etc. So now moving on to this blue dots, that's the development of the railway system in England. 1825, that was the beginning of the development of the railway system in England. So it moves on, you can see it here, until 1840, which is the rail mania. That is to say, becoming maniac for railways. There is a boom in the railway systems there. The orange dots are the concessions that took place in Mexico so that the first railway could be built. That went on to 1872 or 73, when the first railway was inaugurated. So you can see here Arriaga, Mr. Arriaga, who had the concession, but he only built 10 kilometers. Then another concession, Mr. Ricard, then the Mosso brothers, etc., etc. All these orange dots are concessions, or that is to say, people who had received the permit, from the government in order to build the railway. Of course, you can imagine that the French arrived and they had to talk to the French about it. With the murder of Maximilian in 77, they needed to talk to Juarez, who was the president here, but he was in exile at that time. He portrayed himself as a traitor, but then I will not go into details here. It's just to give you an idea of the comparison. In Mexico, there were only 14 kilometers built, which is an equivalent of 8.7 miles, while in England, there was more than 10,000 or more than 1,400 kilometers in the US. So the instability, the political turmoil had actually had a great impact.
So what happened before the railway system? There was something that was called Mexican litera or Mexican birth. The Mexican litera is this sort of coffin, as you can see here on this text. The illustration seems to be seems to show a man that is quite comfortable, but just imagine this was dragged by mules, and imagine the pain of laying there inside that box with a cloth covering the person from the sunlight. This was just from going from Veracruz to Mexico or the other way around. So before railways, this is something that I found very interesting. This is one of the tables, the charts to show the distance that was measured in leagues at the time is about 4.8 kilometers. But what is funny here is that you see the itinerary and you only see the distance that it takes to get to those places. But what we actually want to find out is to see what time do we arrive. This is the first thing a kid asks you, what time do we get there? But here it was impossible to see when you would get there because maybe there was bad weather or there was something with the road. So it's impossible to see the time here. Something interesting as well that is worth mentioning is that Escandon, it was two brothers, Antonio and Manuel Escandon, had been the owners of this diligences, this places, and the two brothers who owned many companies decided to bet on the railway, and they were such important persons at the moment that we have a Escandon colony as one of the most important colonies in the city of Mexico. But beyond the political situation of Mexico, the outlook was also disrupted by the construction of the railroad. Just see this map. I find it amazing. This is at the center of a research located in Puebla, and this map that is painted by hand, of course, this is a lithography. You can see from above an image of the two volcanoes, and this is Pico de Irizaba on the right, and other shorter volcanoes or mountains. We will analyze this map because it is very interesting. You see here on the left, the city of Mexico, and on the right, the city of Veracruz. So this shows us clearly how difficult the terrain is in order to build a railway system. So we will analyze this step by step. If we compare this with the English prairies, we will see that, of course, there was an additional reason beyond political stability to do this, the easiness, the smoothness of the territory. As you can see on this map, there were many railway lines in England and in Scotland. So let's go back to García Cubas map from 1877. And if you look at the bottom left side, you see a diagram that represents the different altitudes. On the left, you see Mexico. It starts going down, and in Paso del Monte is where you see quite a steep movement. So I thought I would compare this with this map, Drake's map, that shows Newton Junction and Birmingham. And at the bottom, you see the different altitudes as well. So I compared both altitudes and just see the difference here. The red line is the Mexican Railway, as it was called, and we're speaking about 2,415 meters, that is 7,923 feet high. Here is where it starts going down. The the machine moved, and it was a mystery for the Englishmen to see how they should accelerate or what kind of brakes they needed to go down that slope and to not have the train leave its tracks. And just compare it with the line in black below, which is a New Junction's train. And there was no difference here. There was no relationship between the complexity of both railway systems. If we move closer, if we zoom in, we see that this was an engineering challenge. There were 16 tunnels and 39 bridges for this railway line. One of the bridges is this one, the Metlac Bridge, which until 1985, it remained there and it was replaced at that moment. So it lasted more than 100 years, as you can see. This was a very complex bridge. There are 139 meters long with all these pillars. Each of these pillars actually had a small deviation. And here you see this lithography that shows the beauty of the landscape and the beauty of the train line here. So considering the route and the construction and how long it took to be completed, we see that there was a first part from Mexico that started in Mexico, and also they started from Veracruz, both times in 1850. Each of these sections shows us the sequence that it took to construct, to build all this line. The branch that was building between 1867 and 1869 is the one that leads you to Puebla. And at the bottom, you see all the difficulties that Mexico was undergoing at the time. And now we will delve deeper into this. This map is amazing because on top of showing us the distances and the altitudes, it also shows us here on the left the different crops that you can have according to the altitudes. For instance, you have cereals. This is the limit of conifers. At the bottom, you see a possible crop of bananas, and also you have the two volcanoes. Also, we have a table of signs where you see forests, the different types of plants, and each of them are reflected on the map itself. And of course, there is a different political divisions, the stations, the borders, etc. On the other hand, we have the table for stations and altitudes, and also distances, but actually it goes from Veracruz to Mexico City instead of going the other way around. If you think about the United States, this could be the distance between Washington and New York, and from Washington to San Diego. But here, for some strange reason, García Cubas designed this the other way around. You see Veracruz, the altitude above sea level, distance in kilometers from Veracruz to Mexico. So the map is very much detailed. Something else that we should highlight here is that in Veracruz, the climate is very warm, it's tropical climate, so there were problems of flooding, of yellow fever or malaria. So of course, this also meant a problem for the construction. Something that's also interesting about this map is that García Cubas placed the zero meridian at the city of Mexico. At that time, the meridian zero was already determined to be in Greenwich. And he also placed meridian 3 in Veracruz. So he did these calculations, and speaking with Dr. Mendoza Vargas, a geographer from the University of Mexico, I could understand why this happened. So from meridian 0 to meridian 3, there were 12 hours in time. And this meant a 3-degree difference between both of them. On the other side, we also have the Imperial Mexican Railway map. This is a very interesting map because it has 3 meters long. It's a single piece. This map is anonymous, and just see the beauty of the lines. This was done with brushes. You see the zoom in Mexico and Veracruz, and this is also from Veracruz to Mexico, curiously. And we arrived finally at the inauguration of the Mexican Railway in 1873. This is the poster that announced that great inauguration at the time. Together with railways, telegraphs were developed as a parallel system. And going back to our timeline here, you see that the yellow line is the one for telegraphs. Of course, is much cheaper and easier to build telegraphs than railways, but just see how it was quickly developed. This is a cartogram. This is a distorted image. I don't know if you see the shape of Mexico. This is Baja California, this is Mexico, and on the right side you see Yucatan Peninsula. And this is a network chart because it's divided by states. And you can notice here that it was developed at the time of Porfirio Diaz because it always included this symbol with the eagle and its wing extended. On the left, you have the telegraph offices, and on the right, you see all the statistics. The telegraphs were always developed towards the north of the country. Mexico saw the power of the United States and that there was a need to be connected with the United States. So there's a comparison between the development of telegraphs towards the north and its relationship, its comparison to its development towards the south. Here, there is a zoom-in image of the distance between Jalisco and the the size that was given to Jalisco in comparison with Querétaro. So here you see the distortion of the image and also the number of telegraph lines that were established at each of those places. This is another telegraphic chart, which was only for employees' use. And I included here a map of railroads on top of it so that you can see that there is correspondence, a clear correspondence between what telegraphs are and railroads, because they were developed simultaneously, and also so that you can see the development of telegraphs in 1892. Railways really changed people's daily life. And how did this happen? Well, in very different ways. On the one hand, it changed the perception of time and space. I will show you this in a minute. It was also a trigger for the development of tourism. People did not used to travel at the time. As I was saying, going to Veracruz was very risky. So you didn't know what you could need there, if there were any health issues. There was also an influence in transport. Many systems were developed, and also there was an influence of railroads on the economy. Before railroads, just imagine cities and towns. They were quite tranquil, very quiet. Maybe only you hear the bell tolls of the churches. But when the railway arrived, that tranquility it just disappeared. When the railway arrived, it used to bring the 3-day-old newspaper. And however, and even so, it was news for people. So the people went there to see if the package that they had requested had arrived, etc. So you see this on the screen, on this text, which shows that railroads disturbed the tranquility of the places it went through.
The whistle was something very important as well. The whistle was the one that told everyone, I'm here, I'm already here. So you can see in this picture the different schemes of the whistle, and the whistle on the left, whose picture I took there at the museum, at the rail museum. So the whistle was an interruption of everyday life. You can see it here, that on the right, well, it's written in English, but it says whistle number 19. And something that I didn't say before, Antonio and Manuel Escandón first made a cooperation with the English and with Englishmen and people from Belgium, and then it continued with the North Americans. So there are a lot of documents and materials that are translated English and Spanish because of that cooperation. This perception of time again shows that the whistle was of great importance. There were whole manuals explaining how to use the whistle properly. For example, a long whistle was to say we are getting closer to a station, we are approaching the station. So there were a lot of instructions showing how to use the whistles properly. And together with this perception of time, it was also important that clocks would work accurately. In this case, we have an example of a clock of that time, and accuracy or precision always implied good service. There was a tolerance of 30 seconds per week. There could be no longer of a delay than that, 30 seconds. I don't know how we Mexicans lost our tolerance to time or the accuracy of time, but anyway. So cost and time changed a lot as well. For example, you could take 4 days if the weather was good, or with rain, it could take up to 11 days. Now with railways, that is to say 1873, that represented 12 hours. Now in a car from Mexico to Veracruz, for example, it could be 3 hours and a half. So just to give you a rough idea, that used to go at 40 kilometers per hour, while the stagecoach used to go at 8 kilometers per hour. And the cost dropped immensely as well. So we will see the route, the itinerary. Same thing as I showed you before, they only showed the distance, remember in the first one. So now they all also talked about time. People needed to know at what time the train left and at what time it arrived. So I wanted to show you here this text, because I think that this text is really important. Those who would like to have some lunch, we are going to stop the train for 30 minutes so that you can have lunch if you wish. So that's what the text, both in English and in Spanish, reads. It was very polite, the way in which they communicated this. I don't know if it was, I would call it elegant, humane, considerate. I don't know, I would say polite. The train, it also said that the train was well coordinated with the cathedral clock, like running in time, so that we could check the time and to make sure that we were on time. And also to give you an idea that there were different trains. The passenger train, which is the first column in white, then the merchandise or the goods train, and also the pulque train. Pulque is a beverage, an alcoholic beverage, which is still produced, manufactured in Mexico. It's not so popular nowadays as it was before, but look at the amount of trains that were just carrying pulque. This is the maguey, where they took the pulque from. So there was a development of tourism that was quite important. First of all, curiosity. That is to say, I want to know, I don't know, if you have papaya in Veracruz, or if you have mango in Veracruz. Oh, so I can actually get to Veracruz nowadays. The distance was shorter. You were no longer thinking about 4 or 11 days. It's just 12 hours. Then the use of photography to promote places. Then the railway companies became trip organizers. There were 3 types of tourism. On the one hand, financial tourism or trade tourism, health and sports. On the other hand, for religious celebrations and just to visit historic places. This is one of the examples of a promotion made by the railway to go to a celebration of Divino Preso in San Juan de Teotihuacan. So the company itself started organizing these kind of touristic trips. We can see very interesting and beautiful examples here. Calendars, agendas, and travel guides. In this case, El Ferrocarril Mexicano is the one that went from Mexico to Veracruz, and with these lithographies, with these images of the cathedral, etc., it was making its own promotion. This calendar was actually the first tourism or travel guides that were fostering a visit to the Mexican Republic. Over here, you can see a diagram or a chart that I think is fascinating because it actually shows the different plants that are blooming at different times in the Valley of Mexico. So it shows from the first buds appearing to the blooming and to the time the flowering ends. So you have all year round and you can choose where you want, when you want to go to the Valley of Mexico according to the flower you want to see. This one is a santoral, which is to show the saints of each day. So it also shows the sunrise and the sunset times the moonrise times when it passes the meridian and the moonset, which I think is fascinating. I mean, I would love to know whether this exists, this kind of santoral chart that shows the different phases of the moon elsewhere. Those same travel guides were used for advertising, that is to say, fostering or promoting different objects. For example, if you could go to the north, to the US, and to start with these economic transactions between the two countries. So we have the velocípedos on the left and the Concorde machines on the right. There was also an influence on transportation. As I was saying before, the Escandón brothers had their company, and for them, it was important to be able to go from the farms, for example, the coffee farms, to bring coffee and all the necessary elements to manufacture coffee, beer, from the farms to the urban centers. There was therefore a development of trams in order to make these kind of connections. So there is a development of systems in many senses. On the one hand, internal communication of rails and external communications with the passengers, with the industries, with the manufacturers, with the packaging companies, then the government, all the regulations, instructions, then the investors, so as to see how much stock they needed to create or to charge, the industries, because trains became one of the main means to transport materials from one place to the other. So internal and external communication. Over here you have a lantern, which is part of the instructions of the trains, of the railway. And you have the training materials here, so that the drivers could know how to move the lamp or the lantern to say what. For example, if I want to say advance, okay, I'll move it up and I don't know, to the side, or from this side to this other side. So another example, it's also in Spanish and in English because of this cooperation with the American companies as well. And this is a picture that was taken in the museum as well, in the storage room of the museum. There is a lot of material there. These billboards that used to be in the train stations. So it was full. The storage room of the museum is full. It's just to go there and start classifying all of this and including it in the museum. Then, development of systems. We have the financial forms, or the stock, or in this case, for example, this is from the Toluca train that was going to Tenaco y San Juan. You can see the calligraphy, you can see the rich and detailed calligraphy. You can see the image of the train itself. Then you have train passes for the different trains. There are 3 examples here on the screen. And the economic activity, which was also very important because it increased the imports and exports. People started knowing other products that they were not familiar with before, and they started connecting the trade centers. And I wanted to show you this picture. This is one of the last examples I'm going to give you. This was developed by Popper, a Romanian that spent many years in Mexico and ended up in Patagonia. This is a commercial directory of the city of Mexico. So you have here La Cruz de Catedral. We have the Alameda. So let me zoom in so that you can actually see it. In each of these squares, you have the different companies or stores. This is a chocolate store, or the Abarrotes store, or this is the Reform of Trade institution. So all of this is perfectly well detailed. You can see the cathedral there. So you have the lines in order to be able to guide yourself and to see exactly where each store is. And thinking about Edgar, I actually found this map also made by Popper. This is from Guadalajara. So the center, the cathedral, Guadalajara is located here in the Jalisco state. So as you can see, the development of the railway network, I mean, it was built 80% between 1880 and 1910. At that time, during those years, the majority of it was built. The first railway, Mexico-Chicago, it was called Paso del Norte. It went from Mexico to Ciudad Juárez. And by 1910, we had 19,748 kilometers. More than 1 century later, we have 4,000 kilometers more, only that. So you can compare these from 1898 to 2014. It hasn't changed much. You can see the railway system hasn't changed that much. So this is the story of the Mexican railway. What are the conclusions then? I think that information design helped us, or at least helped me, to understand the context of Mexico and the historical context of the creation, the construction of the railway. What were the problems that arose, how it changed people's life, how it changed the data, the knowledge, the characteristics of each piece of information design, how life changed based on the emergence of the railway. It was definitely an innovation product, which gave way to the design of many other products, systems, products, and this railway promoted a different kind of life. This process implied a lot for me. I was able to develop a lot of tools to, well, of course, first of all, applying the design process, confirming the importance of this design as a trigger, understanding users through the designed objects, and also organizing information so as to ensure the understanding of the whole process of building these rails.
And I would like to conclude with this phrase. Let me read it out loud, even though you have it on the screen, so that you can see, you can tell me when was this said, actually. We want to be everywhere at the same time, see everything, listen to everything, enjoy everything within an instant. This is a quote by Gutiérrez Nájera in 1880, based on, well, yes, based on the train, the telegraph, on the steam development. Thank you very much. That has been my presentation. If you have any questions, of course, I'm here to answer them. Great, Maria. Thank you so much for such an incredible presentation. I love being able to learn so much about Mexico and also about information design. This is something that I really love about this opportunity of being able to speak about history, opening a window thanks to design. So thank you so much. Edgar, now, what I would like to ask you first, if you had access to this information and as to how the railway stations systems affected you personally or your family members, I was always obsessed with railroads. Ever since I was little, I remember the first time we traveled with my class here in the United States. My mother came with me at a history museum here in DC, and I was fascinated about the size of trains. And now I live in Baltimore, and just 2 blocks away from here, we have the B&O Museum. So there are lots of history here at the United States. And this is something I loved about what Maria was saying. It's not just only the history of Mexico, it's the history of the world, the relationship between what is happening in Europe, the United States. It all has an impact. And there are many political reasons based on money, also as regards the movement of people. And what really caught my eye, and I was hoping that she would mention this, and it is the importance of photography, because when you think about photography and art, well, this is something that happened at the beginning or the half of the 1800s. And just to think about the impact on Mexico and also globally, but think about the Americas, how to promote this movement and to strive to control all this movement from the west to the east of the United States. So I would like to, just if I may, speak about this for a little, just to think about how the United States really changed over this time. And at the beginning, when Maria was starting her presentation, we saw that many indigenous peoples were forcibly moved away at this moment when the railways started being built. And also there was a war here in 1861 at the United States. So the slavery was not legal in Mexico at the beginning of the 1800s, and it was still legal in the United States at that time. So just seeing the relationship between the trains and the movement of people and slavery. So I'm very much interested about learning more about this and this relationship, because if you think also about the impact of the movement of Chinese people when they started building trains from the center of the United States, or actually from California to the center of the United States, and how actually at the end of your presentation towards 1910, there was an impact by the revolution as well. And people really wanted to monopolize trains or the movement of people. So world wars also impacted the movement of Mexicans towards the north. So actually, this is really a source of inspiration. So the question I have for you, I was lucky to travel to El Paso recently. So it's a part of the border with Ciudad Juárez, and you spoke about Ciudad Juárez just now. I didn't really know much about the caminos reales, the paths that were used by indigenous persons, and then they were used by Europeans to start to conquer and to transform people into Catholicism. But do you think that they started using maps, indigenous maps, or these routes that were built were completely new? What do you think? I wouldn't really know for sure, I'm sorry, but certainly there was a cooperation with foreign companies, especially Porfirio Diaz really trusted foreigners more than Mexicans. So I imagine that they must have used the already existent paths by indigenous peoples. I can say that there was a great migration movement from Tlaxcala towards the north, and people went through Saltillo, for example, and there is a sculpture in Saltillo, a very important avenue, Jicontelcal, because they moved even towards the United States. So I imagine that the paths, the routes were part of that route that they needed to follow, but I couldn't say for sure. I'm just assuming this. Something interesting that I didn't mention before is that as there was literas and stagecoaches, of course, in the United States, there was also stagecoaches, but there was also a service called Pony Express in the United States. And Pony Express was those persons that delivered packages on horseback. So they charged by the hour, and they took time to rest with the horse and to take water. So there was some routes in the United States for the Pony Express. And this was just a fun fact that I didn't mention because the topic was Mexico. Well, this is something that I would love people that attended this talk to be interested in, because there are many histories, many great part of the history that we share with the United States and Mexico and Latin America. There's a history as regards the movement of bananas as well, for example, because you spoke about how towns and cities changed, and I thought about the Chiquita company, for example, and how it impacted not only railroads, but also banana production and how we consume bananas nowadays. Yes, we started receiving products from elsewhere, and it was impossible before because they got rotten if they had to travel for so many hours or so many days. So we started to be acquainted with our own spaces, with our own time, and it became speedier because actually the text by Gutierrez Nájera really calls my attention. Because really it seemed like life had changed overnight. What could he say if he saw what is happening right now? We're all met here speaking thanks to translator. We are understanding one another, we are seeing one another, and we are in different places, all of us. So what would he say? I don't know if any attendees have questions for Maria or any comments that you want to make about her presentation. We have a comment, yes, some comments. Joseph Sullivan, thank you so much for being with us today. Joe says that it was very interesting and informative, your presentation, and that there were some amazing and complex information design examples from long ago. So I also love to see the different layers that Maria included in the different original images. I love to see how you intervened the maps by overlapping them and all throughout your investigation, your research. We have a question as regards information design, which comes from Manny. Hello, thanks for the presentation. In the first document at the beginning, how would you improve that? I think they are referring to the government document. You mentioned that it was not exhaustive, so what would you change? Also, do you see that the railway system in Mexico right now has adapted to native languages, since native languages are still spoken right now? In relation to the first question, the analysis that we did, our students and myself, led us to find many mistakes, many errors as regards objective information. There were some icons that were not understandable very clearly by other persons. There were errors as regards, well, if you'd like, I can show you all the mistakes that we found, but right now from memory I could say that basically there was a lack of precision, of objectivity. So what would we do? First of all, to have clear information, correct information, accurate, objective, concise information. For example, the title reads in different regions, and however, there is no information related to regions, for example. So it includes, for example, information such as that you may be wearing a mask inside, but however, the inside are factories. So there is a lack of correspondence between the information and the target audience. And as regards the number of indigenous peoples and languages, there was an attempt to protect indigenous languages for some years. There even is an institute to respect indigenous languages, and recently I reviewed one of these texts where they even used graphs to tell you how this is said in a different language. So there is still an effort right now to recover and respect indigenous languages. But as regards railway systems, I don't think any railway lines use indigenous languages to address people, as you can see in other countries where there are even 3 or 4 languages on a single package. I have never seen that in Mexico, especially as regards indigenous languages. Of course, there are places where there are international visits, so there is English involved, but I have never seen indigenous languages included. And I have had the opportunity to travel, for example, on the train that goes from Mexico to Laredo, and also on La Barranca. I can't remember the name, in Chihuahua it was. And there, for example, you see Raramuris, Tarahumara peoples, and however, there are no signs in Raramuri language. So in order to answer your question, I cannot tell you for sure either, because it has all been documentary work, basically. But I have personally traveled and I have never seen an indigenous language sign.
Okay, and now this question of indigenous languages made me go back to the research conducted by Edgar, because in Brazil, for example, I'm from Brazil, so the indigenous population there is getting increasingly smaller. From a personal point of view, I was never in touch with indigenous languages in my country, or even the indigenous culture, which is very much mixed. Well, in Brazil, everything is mixed, but sometimes we cannot actually like pull them apart. For example, and I'm talking about gastronomic, I mean, the typical health traditions. There is a lot of influence of indigenous culture in everything. So what happens in Mexico? How much did or does the indigenous culture have an impact on your work, Edgar? Well, for me, I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't realize of all of this. It was just when I started investigating or making research on my own language, Spanish. I mean, you use words in Spanish and you use other words. I didn't realize all of that since I started taking classes, Spanish classes here in the US. And my teacher said, that's not the word, it's this one. So I realized, for example, that zacaten, I think it means grass or something like that, but it's a word that I used. The interesting thing of all of that is that in Mexico, in many cities or states, many have names that are indigenous. So it's indigenous, but it sounds as Spanish, so it stays. And this is something that I'm learning about my own culture. I mean, how I speak, how my family speaks. And for example, we are Catholics, and you cannot hide the relation that we'll have with the indigenous communities in Mexico. For example, the celebration of the Guadalupe Virgin and the dances, the indigenous dances for the Virgin. And I was just thinking, for example, I was lucky enough to vote in the US as well as in Mexico. So because I'm a citizen of both countries. And something that I really liked of the Mexican design was the information for foreigners to be able to vote in Mexico. And I looked it up on the internet and I found a lot of like leaflets in different languages. So that's changing as well. The indigenous languages and how we regard that in Mexico, that's changing. And I'm really interested in the open air schools that we used to have in Mexico. It used to help indigenous communities or indigenous community members to be able to go to different cities and how to navigate those cities. So that used to happen a lot in Mexico. And then that's the part that I love of today's conversation, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of history, and there's a lot of history that is hidden on purpose because of low resources, maybe, or because not so many people speak English or Spanish. But I'm learning to pose the question of why, and lifting stones. Sometimes you may find a snake, but other times, or it also helps you to start thinking about it, or thinking about why, the reason behind all of that, who was earning money behind all of that. I'm really not so much familiar with the Mexican history. I know more about the US, but there's a lot of like things to be compared. And yeah, I keep learning. Undoubtedly, yes. We have another question from Miguel Zavala. The question is, are there any plans to implement new technologies in the railways? In my mind, trains are a symbol of immigrants, so I'm curious about how that will affect people traveling through the border of Chiapas. Okay, so we're talking about the border of Chiapas in particular. We know that Chiapas is the starting point of many trips for many migrants who come from Central America. And then they continue going up through different roads. Some of them take the road through Puebla, others through Veracruz. So the railway that we were mentioning the other day, the one called La Bestia, it's the railway that transports many migrants to the northern border of Mexico. So the changes, well, nowadays we are building a transseismic train, which I don't think will have a great impact on the passage of migrants in this regard, at least. And there is the Mayan train being built as well, which will connect Cancun with Mérida and with Palenque as well in Chiapas. And that will help a bit, but the train is thought mainly for tourists. It's not to transport passengers, really. So I think that, it should be finished in a year or 2 years' time, but I don't know. Those are the the only two trains that are being built now. La Bestia has been on for many years. I mean, I think it was one of the from the first from the time of Porfirio Díaz. I mean, the situation of migrants is very painful, mainly if you don't have safety or security or work in your own country, or if you don't have the way to have a better life. So it is a pity that we need to see, that we see this dangerous experience. It's not only taking a train, it's the assaults, the things, that the painful things that happen there. We've seen an example of that, what happened in Texas. So those are never-ending stories. We're talking about last century, and now we are still experiencing these kind of tragedies. So the railway, will it help in this regard? Well, the ones that are currently being built, not really. Something that made me reflect, that left me thinking, there was a train from Acapulco to the city of Mexico, and that was being built. And that's going through the mountains, Sierra Central. And that's an area that is very dangerous, very violent. So I wonder if they had actually finished building that railway, maybe that area would not be as dangerous as it currently is. Because you know that the train connects places, ideas, products, developments. I mean, it connects a lot of things. So now we're talking about railways, yes, but everything has an impact on something else in life. So answering your question, how to help migrants? Well, the new railways, I don't think they will help much. But I hope there wouldn't be such a need for migration, the needs that we can experience in all our countries. May I add something else? Read about what's happening currently in Mexico, about what are the ideas that are coming through the border, that is to say, how we can deal with migrations in Mexico, what the Mexican borders are like, and what they are doing so as not to help migrants. I mean, this is what has been on for years and years. This is not something new in Mexico, but this is something that, I mean, you know, the idea of becoming more nationalist, this idea that I'm a Mexican, why are you are not helping me if I'm a Mexican? I'm seeing this from my own family. I'm speaking like from a personal point of view as well. This is quite complex because there are a lot of people with very low resources living in Mexico and throughout the world. But there are, of course, beautiful things, and Maria mentioned this as well when we were preparing the material for this talk. The women, the communities that are helping the migrants, I don't know, they bring food, for example, they even throw food to the train so that hopefully they will be able to catch at least some food. I'm from Guadalajara, so I'm lucky enough to be able to go and visit Mexico. But I think that the technology, the cutting edge technologies in the metro lines mainly. And we still follow suit. I mean, we see what they are building in Europe. For example, in Guadalajara, there was this machine that was making like drilling for the train to be built. And it was very interesting to actually see how everything was related, in this case, to France. Yeah, I know. Migration is a very complicated issue. But I would just say read, listen to stories of, there are a lot of perspectives, different points of view that sometimes are not so widely heard. Yes, indeed. It's an essential topic, what you're mentioning. I mean, it's impossible not to bring it up to the conversation. And Edgar, I would like to know as well how your research is moving forward? What's the project you're working on right now? I know if you want to share anything about it, at what stage you are. Yes, well, I've just received some money from the Baltimore, like a financing. Yeah, it's actually helping me pose the questions that I'm posing here, you know, to be able to travel, to go to El Paso. It's called Big Bang National Park. I mean, it's just a river, Rio Bravo, that is there. But I'm really fascinated not only by the history, but also by the history of plants. Plants, as you can see behind me, how to be able to keep plants alive at home, because that's also part of how the world has transformed itself. So I'm making a lot of research about plants, movements of plants, and how they control people. In my culture, as an indigenous, a member of an indigenous community, I'm trying to learn more about it. There is a movement in Mexico. So being a mestizo, like mixed race, what it means to be a mestizo and what's the image of being Mexican. That's something that the government tried to promote in the 1900s. And that's something that is still existing in the US, you know, this, I'm proud of being a Mexican. And sometimes they forget the indigenous side of it. Usually see it only at football matches, you know, with the Azteca t-shirts and everything, but it's more complicated than that. Great. I love to learn from your work as well. So looking forward to seeing it too. Okay, it's almost 7:30 here. I would like to thank you, Maria, and to thank you, Edgar, both of you. Thank you, Maria, for this beautiful presentation that gives us the excuse to talk about Mexico and to talk about information design, but as well to talk about history, to talk about identity, and to learn so much from you. Thank you. Thank you indeed. I want to thank the translators as well, the interpreters. Indeed, I want to thank all the interpreters. And thank you, Edgar, as well. It's such a pleasure to be able to hold this event from Baltimore and to be connecting Mexico, Baltimore, and the rest of the world. Maria is currently in Spain, right? So we are all connected. And we are working with volunteers from all over the world. So again, thank you all. And a big thanks to all of you who have joined and who are still listening to us. If you want to learn more about our future events, visit our website and see you next time.